This podcast is brought to you by Ziva, Functional Training Institute's exclusive equipment partner. Engineered for purpose and performance, Ziva's elite equipment supports every rep, every move, and every goal. Hi, it's Tarek, your host of the Purpose Driven Movement podcast. On this session, I have Dr. Denise Furness, and we discuss health pillars to a healthier and happier life. Lots to consider there, but it's all about how we can optimize concepts like longevity for our own experience. We talk about genetic testing, DNA testing, the methylation cycle, BDNF. There's so many just great knowledge bombs in this episode not to be missed, and really making sense of understanding markers of health. So what are we eating? What's causing the problem? How to move better? The different gears of movement, and that exercise at high intensities is oxidative stress and emotional stress. So we're going to dive into all of these and provide layers of wisdom and insight to this episode. And this episode is not to be missed. Enjoy. Check out the Functional Training Institute's latest offer, which is 15% off of any of our online training courses. Simply go to functionaltraininginstitute.com and input PDM15 at cart checkout. Hello and welcome to the Purpose Driven Movement podcast. I've got a special guest today, Dr. Denise Furness. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Actually, I was just whinging to you that I had food poisoning last week, but in all honesty, I am getting better. But isn't it funny how we just go, I'm well, I'm fantastic.
It's true to say that, isn't it? It can become a mundane thing, but to be aware of our language, our energies, and thanks for framing that up. And we've been chit-chatting for quite a while about getting you on. So, firstly, thank you for making the time. And I think the guests are going to have a wonderful listening, and there's going to be lots of knowledge bombs in this episode. So thank you for showing up.
Oh, and thank you for your patience. I know we have been talking about this for a really long time, and I think you and I are both really excited about this area, the future of healthcare. Obviously, exercise is such a huge component, but it's bigger than that. We're turning people's lives around. We're reducing chronic disease. I mean, we're in a current state across the globe where people are getting heavier, and Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm sure we'll touch on, a big thing that I'm interested in. And I know you've got a big interest in, cognitive wellness, and whether it's diabetes, cardiovascular disease. I mean, the world is just getting sicker, and there's so much that we can do.
Yeah, it seems to be a proliferation, and we will dive into that in a moment. So firstly, if you could let the listeners know a bit about you, obviously your area of interest and expertise, that would be tremendous.
Yeah, so I'm a geneticist. I started off as more of a scientist for a decade in the fertility space, so looking at certain genes like MTHFR, which some of the listeners may know, but more in relation to reproductive health, so working in a recurrent miscarriage clinic in the fertility space. But then had my own health journey, recovered from Graves' disease, and that moved me into integrative medicine. I've also studied Cert 3 and 4, so human nutrition, exercise physiology, went on continuous learner, like probably the people that are listening right now. I'm sure you've got many people that are, really loving the learning. We're all forever learners. And then now the last 5 years or so, really in this healthy aging space. But I do a lot of genetic testing, functional testing.
Who would be your clients, if you like? What's your area that you'd focus in on? Is it medical, or is it, preventative health?
Yeah, definitely preventative health. A while ago, it was a lot more almost on that, as an integrative medicine side, holistic health, helping people get out of chronic illness. But I would say in the last few years, it's been a pleasure to work with a lot of people that are interested in healthy aging. Like what you said, proactive health, like they're coming maybe just a couple of niggles. They're not coming because mainstream medicine can't get them well. I used to get really complicated patients. Now we do have this movement where people are like, I want to age really well.
Yeah, I had Dwyer on a previous podcast, and we touched on this idea of longevity and what is it. So I think we're still sort of figuring it out from a cross-spectrum professional perspective. And I think, again, it's aligning for, whether it's the general user who doesn't have guidance through a coach or a practitioner, and they're sort of on their own, and they're seeing all of this information on social media, anywhere, everywhere, right? And that's the thing is sort of kind of reining it in a little bit without kind of boxing a definition. So it'll be quite intriguing to get your perspective on this longevity, and in particular, DNA testing and epigenetics and all of the other excellent stuff we're going to talk about, which which this topic is health pillars to a healthier and happier life. So I think that's like a beautiful way to enter into this whole equation. Tell us a little bit about, epigenetics, DNA testing, and kind of how those two things are so important for maximizing health outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, goodness, where do I start? But I guess to set off with, if you're interested in your health, there's no better way than knowing what is going to, or what is more likely to work for you, because there is no one size fits all. And when it comes to our DNA, so your DNA, your instructions, I tell, patients and clients, or even practitioners when we're learning, you think of it like your instruction manual. So we're all born with, these instructions. So you inherit your DNA from your mum and dad, and it influences what we look like, eye color, height, but also our food preferences, our sensitivity. Some of us will have genes that mean we're sensitive to lactose. We can't break down milk sugar, or gluten, whereas other people don't have the gluten gene. They'll never develop celiac disease or gluten sensitivity because they don't have the gene that reacts to gluten to make those antibodies. So your DNA are the instructions. They make all the proteins, not just the muscles, but the enzymes, the transporters. And we can test that now. In all honesty, most of us as humans, not most of us, we are all extremely similar genetically. So your DNA codes for the genes, and more than 99% of our genome is identical amongst all of us. But we do have these slight differences. And as I said, they influence our looks, our traits, our dietary preferences, but also our risk of health and disease. And we can test that, and that's what I do with my patients. So in the beginning, I used to do it in a fertility aspect. I do a lot of women's health, but now, as I said, healthy aging, helping people understand their DNA, what they've inherited, their strengths and susceptibilities. And then we talk about diet, lifestyle, exercise that suits them. So they're really working with their DNA for, optimal health. Epigenetics is a little bit different. So genetics is your DNA. Epigenetics, we're thinking about things that sit on the DNA, and they influence the turning off and on of your genes. And this is where exercise comes in, where certain foods come in. Our environment has the ability to turn on genes, and that happens through these epigenetic mechanisms. So literally these things that sit on the DNA. And epi in Greek actually means on top of or above. So we have these things that sit on the DNA.
I really love that kind of whole paradigm thing of that we're 99% similar, but we have that 1% of difference, which kind of we keep that uniqueness, but we're so interconnected as a species and life form as well. I'd extend that too as well, which I think is a promising thing. We're not just, hey, look at me, I'm unique. You are, but you're actually interconnected. And so it's interesting that, sometimes if we act with paradigms, everything else that follows, how we behave, what we say, is not just about us. It's the fact that, we're all interconnected, which I think is fascinating about this topic. And it's all of these variations that we need to identify along the way on our journey. And one of those is getting into methylation. And that's a big thing now, of course, in the whole longevity movement, as is DNA testing, which we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts about. But this whole concept of methylation cycle, what is it firstly?
I love this stuff. So this is where I did my PhD. So I was looking at, as I said, the gene MTHFR, but others, MTHFD1. There's a number of sort of genes that code for enzymes in this pathway. But just to sort of pull back, what is methylation? It's a fundamental process in the body. Think of it like something that regulates hormones, regulates your stress levels, regulates your energy. Think of it as a regulatory mechanism. It's hard to pinpoint because methylation touches on so many systems in the body. And actually, when I talk to you about epigenetics, things sitting on the DNA, that also ties into methylations because they're methyl groups. And without getting too sciencey, just to technically answer the question, a methyl group, which is when we're talking about methylation, we're talking about passing on methyl groups onto adrenaline to stop you being stressed, or onto estrogen to clear it, or onto a compound here to make phosphatidylcholine. So you're adding these methyl groups onto things and you're changing the function. As I said, it's regulating things. That's what methylation is. But to pull back, a methyl group is simply just a carbon and 3 hydrogens. But then we have this methylation cycle that we often think about. But the reason we hear so much about methylation is because, as I said, if we get into specific things, hormone balance, neurotransmitters, energy. Methylation is helping influence these things. And I think sometimes easier concepts to understand, something like inflammation. We know that inflammation is something that is good and can be negative in the body. It's really important for clearing out pathogens. We get a bit after we exercise, but if we get, too much or the levels are out, we can have a problem. And methylation's a bit the same. We just want to keep it in check. It's something that is fundamental, inflammation, methylation, detoxification. These are all processes that we want to keep in balance for us to be truly well. Or even if you've got a chronic disease and you want to reverse that, like I did with my autoimmune disease, these are the pathways we want to focus on, because that gets your cells truly well.
This is great. No, so it's the process by which also the genes switch on and off. So that's where the epigenetic elements tied in. So methylation's kind of like the fuel or the modulator for the turning on and off of genes, yeah?
Yeah. So when we think of the epigenetic component, these methyl groups literally sit on the DNA and they act like they block genes being turned on. So in most cases, you can get technical, sometimes not always is, but 99.999% of the time, methylation is stopping a gene being turned on. And this is really important, because just even in the sense of thinking about all your cells, every single one of your cells contains all of your chromosomes with all of your DNA. So your whole genome. We could take a cell from your blood or from your cheek or, from saliva, and we could get your entire genome. But we don't want all of the genes turned on in every cell. We only want the genes linked with, keratin, or being a skin cell, turn on in skin cell. We only want the gene for insulin to be turned on the pancreas, nowhere else. So it's methylation that's turning off all the genes. It says, we don't need you now. Or let's say you had a bit of viral DNA incorporated into the genome. We're going to suppress that so that you're not turned on. So it's stopping genes from being turned on, but it's a good thing. It's regulating what happens.
Yeah, I understand that there are certain factors, the creation of enzymes like the nutritional balance, which will affect the methylation cycle, if I'm not mistaken. We won't dive into that so much, and that's something that I think the listeners must research. And when your paper's released, which we'll go into in a moment, we'll be able to share that. But for now, I'd like to switch more to the movement element and, intensities of exercise, what's good, what's not, to kind of optimize that methylation cycle.
And even though I love methylation, love talking about it, just with exercise in general, and we talked about epigenetics, turning genes off and on, exercise causes a shift in gene expression. So not only are you turning on genes that you would expect in relation to, movement and muscle, but you're also turning on genes like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So BDNF is what helps maintain our neurons. So when we're young, it helps with the brain developing all those neurons. As we age, we want to have plenty of BDNF so we're not losing those neural pathways. We're not losing those neurons. So if you want your brain to be firing, BDNF is not only involved in just the neurons and memories and learning and for your brain health, it also strongly is associated with mood. And we know that people that have high levels of BDNF are less likely to be depressed. So exercise increases BDNF naturally in the brain. And for those that are interested in or have heard about BDNF, there are studies at the moment, trials where they're looking at gene therapy in relation to Alzheimer's. Some of the other countries I go to, when I go to conferences, you can get peptides and you can put the little nasal spray of BDNF in there to make you feel better and this and that. But exercise is one of the best things. And they've done studies in animal models and even humans. You can see the brain just lights up when you start exercising and you get this increase in BDNF. And that's just one example of one gene that is being turned on by exercise.
Yeah, terrific. Could you spell out what BDNF stands for again?
Yeah, brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF.
BDNF for those. That's a great acronym.
If you're interested in healthy aging, longevity, BDNF.
Attention fitness professionals worldwide. Idea World, the premier global fitness convention, is coming to California, USA this July 17th to 19th. This is your opportunity to earn up to 20 CEC hours from internationally recognized educators while connecting with the industry's most passionate professionals. The Idea World Fitness and Nutrition Expo runs alongside the convention and is completely free and open to the public, featuring cutting-edge gear, technology and nutrition products from leading global brands. Don't miss this career-defining event. Register now at ideafit.com/world and use code PDM25 for a special discount on full registration.
one of those things that's really focused on. And as I said, not just from a research perspective, but those biohackers are looking at, quite invasive things and doing gene therapy themselves or having all these peptides. But the reality is probably the most evidence we have for increasing levels is through exercise. And it's not just BDNF. There are plenty of other genes as well, but that's one that can have a big impact on cognition and brain health and reducing risk of, Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that.
That's quite amazing and just profound, I think, to note that whilst the biohacking movement is prevalent and it seems kind of, the tip of the tongue around longevity, there are other elements here now that kind of play out in an equally, if not more important fashion. And we'll dive into the different movement components that could actually magnify BDNF in a moment. But just to kind of go back a little bit, so just for the listeners' sake, and obviously I always say encourage more research, the methylation is the blocker, whereas epigenetics can switch on and off genes. And so methylation will be either that block that kind of stops that switching on and off, just to make sure we're on track with where we're going here.
So just to add another level, when we talk about epigenetics, we aren't just talking about methylation. We talk about methylation a lot. One, I've spent 20 years in this space, but we know the most about it. I'm not the only one. That's what we know the most about as scientists and practitioners and doctors. And however, there's also something called acetylation. We're adding acetyl groups that sort of turns on DNA. And then we have these things called microRNAs or, shorter little RNAs that can turn on genes as well. So there are other mechanisms. Often when it comes to turning genes on, the methyl groups are being removed, which is, what can happen. So you're actually then triggering for that methylation, those, carbons and hydrogens be taken off the DNA, or you're adding an acetyl group. Like just to sort of turn away from exercise for a moment and talk about food, we often talk about blueberries being, antioxidants. What blueberries have is they're changing the acetylation patterns on the DNA and they're turning on your detoxification enzymes. So your food talks to your DNA just like the movement and the exercise talks to your DNA as well. So epigenetics is that link between the environmental cues, that could even be a thought, like a trauma, a food, exercise, music, a smell, a sound. All of these things will change these little things on the DNA, and then you'll start to make different neurotransmitters and you'll feel good when you smell this smell because you're like, oh my God, that smells like my nana's cooking from whenever. I feel amazing. Like that's epigenetics. You're churning on genes and that comes from those environmental cues. So methylation is what we talk about the most. It's very important for turning the genes off, but there are some other components as well.
Yeah, I know that Bruce Lipton was one that I've read his book years ago. I'm talking like 20 odd years ago when I was a little bit younger than I am today. And it was just fascinating. It was a bit of a paradigm, certainly for me as a kind of 20 odd year old reading this book about biology of belief. And then obviously that movement has, grown rapidly and the acceptance and understanding of epigenetics with folk like yourself who have delved into specific elements of epigenetics. So it's quite fascinating, has been for me and hopefully the listeners as well. As we're diving into some of the nuts and bolts. Sorry, you.
I was speaking at an event and he was the opening. It was just in New Zealand. It wasn't too far away, but he did the opening. And I am I'm a geneticist and I trained at CSIRO, government scientist, and then, in the public hospital and whatever else. So even though I'm integrative and open, I'm still, this is what DNA is and this is what epigenetics is. You can hear when I speak to you, I'm sort of going back to the science. Bruce Lipton's a little bit more out there and he opened up and he almost was sort of throwing out he's like that whole dogma of genetics and DNA, and he kind of just almost threw it all under the bus. And I thought, oh my God, I'm the second speaker and I'm here teaching. This was integrative doctors, and I'm here to teach about DNA testing in clinic and doing genetic testing. And I just thought, I don't know if I'm going to be okay now. Like I feel like he sort of said that this stuff almost isn't real because, he's talking about the environmental and all this other sort of stuff. And anyway, long story short, I got up there. I was a little bit nervous thinking, my goodness, this is not aligning with the previous speaker. And I said to someone jokingly as I was coming on stage, God, I might as well just do a dance up there after that, And then music, somehow someone's phone, something happened. Anyway, this music started coming through the speakers, like this little Latin music. Anyway, I did a little Latin random dance on the stage and it totally loosened me up. And then I was on and I gave my talk as I did and I acknowledged what Bruce said. It all came together. I got rid of the nerves and said how amazing it was that he talked about there is this thing. But that does show sometimes there is a bit of a divine intervention, which is where he goes. He talks about things that are beyond us as scientists. So it was just a fascinating moment for me. My talk was received really well, but just really interesting. I thought I would share that story with you.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Yeah, no, he's one of the people that I've admired over the years, and definitely there's a spiritual element, which I believe is also true. But obviously, we want to ground it in some science and some materialism to understand the phenomena that ensues. Now, perhaps we can touch on those food groups just sort of a bit generally, rather than diving into them and then go into the movement stuff. Because I thought when you mentioned earlier the importance of it, such as blueberries, did you want to touch on just a quick analysis around the importance of the food groups in relation to methylation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big one. You can do so much with methylation. So I think another reason as practitioners or people in the health space, we talk about methylation is because there really is so much that we can do to help balance that. So not only is it driven by these key enzymes, but these enzymes require folate. So that is sort of the main substrate. So when we talk about these methyl groups, for them to be passed on, we need this folate. And then the other enzymes that are involved in that methylation pathway require B12, B6, B2. So you're really thinking about folate and B vitamins. And we can actually get a lot of folate from our food. So if you're eating real food, green leafy vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, avocados, tons of folate. But the issue is, I think in this day and age, is that often people aren't eating enough of the real food, or something like folate in broccoli, for example. It's heat and light sensitive. If it's at the supermarket for a few days, then the levels decrease, then you cook it and you're actually not getting as much of the folate from it that you would have once upon a time. So even though we're pretty lucky in countries like Australia, in most countries you are getting what we think is enough folate to not get really sick. The reality is it's not often the optimal amount to balance something like methylation, because coming back to methylation and what it is, if you're chronically stressed, you're in this fast-paced life and you're producing a lot of adrenaline, you're going to require more methyl groups to manage that stress response. So if someone is stressed and you're not eating as much folate, and maybe you've got some genes that mean you don't make as much of that methylfolate, that's when you start to get into these major, methylation issues. And, you're not exercising, so the body's stagnant. You're not even getting these nutrients, passed around the body. So it's all of these things coming together, and often why a lot of people tend to have what we call methylation issues.
So whilst obviously you're advocating whole food groups, sometimes supplementation could be a necessary pathway to support that lack thereof that you were just explaining earlier.
Yeah, I do prescribe supplements a lot. Obviously, we want to have that food first approach. But if someone is a bit unwell and fatigued and struggling, often they'll need the supplements first too, because then that can kind of help them come back. And then they've got the energy and the motivation to sort of, to cook and then get into the exercise and focus on their sleep and all the things that are really going to help with that health span and that longevity, because we need to get those foundations. The supplements are really just supplements, but they're definitely something that can help. And there will be some people that will need certain supplements. And obviously there are the methylated folate, methylated B12s. These are the forms that directly support methylation. But I would say, you're listening to this, doesn't mean you should run to the pharmacy or the supermarket or buy supplements online. Always chat to a health practitioner. At a minimum, have a chat to the pharmacist. Often they've got someone there who's quite knowledgeable on supplements, because not everyone needs them. It's rare, very rare, but some people even react negatively to some of these methylated supplements. So you just want to be a little cautious, and I definitely don't advocate for supplementing without chatting to someone.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I fell victim to that myself, probably like a lot of people, where, you pluck all of the supplements under the sun and you're thinking, oh yeah, this is good for me, when actually it's somewhat of a guesswork. So in order to remove that guesswork and make sure that you're supplementing well and optimally, let's say, how important is DNA testing, and furthermore, making sure that when you're doing the DNA testing, there's a correct interpretation, i.e. with a professional like yourself to kind of coach and advise.
Yeah, I love that you said that. So that's exactly why I do the DNA testing. So we're looking for, what are these areas, do you have a lot of genetic variations in this methylation cycle that tells us you are likely to require more folate or more B vitamins? And then if so, I won't just prescribe on the genetics alone. Then we'll talk about the diet and the lifestyle and just check on their symptoms. And because it's rare, but sometimes people might have all those genes, but actually their health is great. Their digestive system's good. They're having a whole food diet. They're not under high stress, and maybe they don't need the extra support. I mean, it's rare in this day and age, but again, we're using the genetics. In most cases, this will help me identify where I want to focus. Or for someone else, it might be they've got a lot of genes in relation to inflammation, like tumor necrosis factor alpha or interleukin 6. Again, these things are really heavily influenced by exercise. we mentioned about exercise before and we said BDNF, you're also turning on interleukin-6, these inflammatory cytokines. And in a sense, a little bit of inflammation, a little bit of oxidative stress can be good for us actually, but it's when it becomes too much. And just now sort of pulling back to the exercise component, exercise is definitely one of the key components of my, therapeutic strategies and prescriptions with patients. And it was in the healthy aging study that we'll touch on. But you definitely don't want to over-exercise either. So, over-exercising can be as bad as, not exercising in a sense, because you start to do damage to the cells. There's too much of those inflammatory cytokines, or you start depleting the system of certain things. So it's exercise, but if you are really trying to get to that next level in the sense of lifting heavier, running faster, you're competing at a really high level, you need to ensure that you are getting the nutrition. I'm sure this is all of the stuff that you would do, your expertise and what you teach, but, getting in that good nutrition, getting in that recovery time. And with the genes and the genetics, we can actually get a bit of an understanding of where your vulnerabilities are. Maybe you need a bit more active recovery because you have a lot of these, what we call pro-inflammatory cytokines, or you have lots of genetic variations that mean your antioxidant enzymes don't work as well. So when those mitochondria are making all that ATP, you're actually making all these free radicals. Some people genetically will be able to mop that up really quickly. They can tolerate more oxidative stress. So you can push yourself, with exercise and high intensity and manage that better, where someone else will get that big dose of oxidative stress and actually it could wipe them out. It could potentially, get them to somewhere if they keep going like a chronic fatigue or something, because they just don't have the same capacity to deal with that level of oxidative stress. These free radicals can cause damage. Whereas others, that's a strength. They can just tolerate a lot more of those free radicals. So even though exercise is great, we want to make lots of, ATP and energy, there are these kind of waste products and we need to be able to manage those in the body, and our genes do influence how well we can clear a lot of those, what we call free radicals and waste products.
Yeah, so you talked earlier like this understanding of a gear system. So gear 1 is low intensity, gear 5 is really high intensity. And so you've got not only that oxidative stress, but you've also got the emotional elements if overtraining occurs as well. So there are all these different stresses, de-stress that come about by the negatively training. And that's where, we always sort of talk with a guest about this at some level. It depends on your outcomes. Like if you're competing for a sport that requires certain sessions that are high intensity for the outcomes of competing, it's completely different to one's own journey, where it's a process of discovering this concept of, hey, I want to do this for a long time, for as long as I can live. That's where this longevity piece comes into it now, sort of focusing a little bit more on that. And we talked about earlier BDNF and so forth, and dive into the findings of your recent study in a moment. It pertains to the healthy aging study findings. But one of those is like, from what I researched, it's lower intensities. It could be contemplative practices, whether it's Tai Chi or yoga or those type of practices. It could be walking, brisk walking, and it could be things like cognitive fitness training, which is an area of my passion as well. And so that cognitive, which probably attaches more to the BDNF outcomes, is really crucial. One of those notions is dual tasking. So dual tasking is, I might give you, let's say, 3 different movements: a squat, a push-up, and a jump, right? And then I associate the colors with those. So I might say red, okay, and then you squat. Blue, and then you got to push up. And that's what dual tasking is. So you're actually, it's a movement outcome attached to a command. Not all the times is it a verbal command, right? So I had Anna Milani, who's an expert in this space, and we're both collaborating in this area. So she's far more knowledgeable in this than I am. But these are the sort of things perhaps that attach to longevity and also allow for this concept of BDNF to kind of come to life. So just sort of that being, I'm talking too much, right? So I need you now to come in and layer in your understanding.
Yeah, no, it's actually interesting because what you're saying is 100% correct in the sense that, and I've overtrained in the past. I've been there, done that, got myself really unwell. Sometimes you don't stop and think about it, but an athlete has an on season and an off season. When you're a recreational athlete, we just go and we just want better and better and expect more from ourselves. And then, you either get a physical injury or a chronic illness, something stops you. So So, I've been there. I've learnt the hard way. But the good thing about that is I went in and did my Cert 3 and 4 and went and studied exercise, phys and all that. I wanted to understand and, got my health back, which was great. But I really did drive myself into the ground and thought I was being healthy. That was the crazy thing. Like, I actually thought I was being really healthy. I didn't realize what I was doing to my body, the amount of stress that, there wasn't the recovery time. What I love about genetics, particularly if I get a client like me, because sometimes I do get the overachievers, they are wanting to be the best in everything. And when I'm running through that DNA, I can say to them, listen, look at these inflammatory genes, look at these antioxidants. So it's going to be a bit harder for your body to tolerate that level of exercise. I'm not saying it's not, you can't do it, but let's factor in a little bit of what I call active recovery in the sense of whether that's a massage or a sauna or a few more off days. You're actually going to be able to perform better. And then we can get into the things that you're talking about, Tarek, too, in the really that healthy aging space and longevity and improving health span. Really, what is the outcome? What do you want here? Do you want a long, healthy life? Because we also don't want to be doing that much damage to the body. And you mentioned about the colors. I haven't heard about that. That's fascinating. And it's so clever because you're triggering the mind as well. But we have quite a lot of studies with dancing, particularly when it comes to reversing early stage cognitive decline. So it's not just about prevention. We actually even have some studies with exercise that you can improve memory and early stage cognitive decline. So when people are really getting that, the beginning, so they don't have, long-standing Alzheimer's or dementia, but they are starting to, have some degeneration, issues with memory, issue with language. But that can be turned around with exercise. We don't yet have a specific exercise that is the best because it depends on the individual. Do they prefer, you just got to do something, whatever they prefer. But dancing, we probably have some of the best results and quickest results with improving brain function and memory with dancing. And we think it's because they're having to remember things. Like, it's not just lifting weights, and there's nothing wrong with lifting weights because if we want to talk about longevity, we want muscle, right? That's so important. But the dancing, you are trying to remember moves and being coordinated. And then on top of that, which I think may be some of the work that you do as well, Tarek, I think with the dancing, often there's a social component as well. So, interacting with people, which is really, really important as well. And actually, I know about some of your work and nature. I'm not saying we're dancing outside, but these are the things that are important as well. And often I don't speak a lot about that. I mean, I do when I'm doing my education and, talks, and we're looking at that big holistic approach. But there are other things aside from the diet and the exercise and the supplements and the sleep, just connecting with people, connecting with nature. It's so important. We're not made to just sit inside in front of a computer screen all day. That's what's making us sick when we're just doing that constantly.
Yeah, maybe that's some piece of advice, perhaps, through direct experience, and what the research is saying as well is try not to be so rigid, I suppose, kind of be open to what movement can offer, whether it's in a gym frame or whether it's outdoors in nature, whether it's, surfing or just being in the ocean. There are so many different ways to sort of approach one's movement journey. And so I think, be open would be, and be intuitive. You talked about that earlier, kind of sensing that preference could be that me as the coach says, okay, well, Denise, I think you might like this, but it's actually a little bit of experimentation and probably exploration on behalf of, the client and the coach. But I think if you don't have a personal trainer or someone to guide you, just intuiting, being present to what you're doing is really crucial. If we're all always just plugged in, let's say in nature, and, you've got your headset on, you're missing out on all of the surrounding sounds. So your whole sensory system is, well, not the whole, but obviously the verbal is, and the sounds more so of the animals and so forth and insects is suppressed. So, you're actually depriving that sensory engagement as well, just to kind of touch on that a little bit, and so going back to the whole cognitive element and just sort of healthy aging, could you talk more about the findings of this recent study pertaining to, physical activity?
Yeah, so the study came about because in 2023 here in Australia, there was a new test that came out for biological aging, and those that are, if you are in the US or somewhere else, this test had been around for a little while. And even though I understand epigenetics and methylation, like I explained, I actually used to test the methyl groups on the DNA when I had a lab. But this was our first commercial test where we as practitioners could order the test. And I just wasn't completely certain if I wanted to introduce that to clinic. So I was like, well, why don't I start a small study? I was going to have 10 people and then it was 30 and we ended up with 60. So I did a podcast. We had 300 people inquire that weekend. So I was like, oh my God, you need to put a protocol together like immediately. It's nothing like getting a kick in the butt. So in all honesty, I put a protocol together that I thought would work for me, but also that's, based on evidence, and had some key supplements, whole food diet, 30 minutes of exercise. We didn't exactly say what exercise you had to do, but I think Paul Taylor, he was the exercise physiologist involved. So we had lots of resources. Strength training we asked them to do that 3 times a week, and then they could do, the other days could be walking or it could be something, but movement every day for 30 minutes. Mindfulness for 10 minutes. And we saw phenomenal results actually. So the study 1 showed that you could reduce biological age. So those methyl groups are sitting on the DNA are linked with aging. So you can have kind of positive methylation patterns that are keeping the genes off that should be off, or we can have sort of aberrant methylation patterns that are linked with accelerated aging. And we now know enough about methylation on the DNA that it is strongly linked with aging and a number of chronic conditions. So we looked at biological age at the start. We did my 3-month protocol. Paul and I checked in with them. We had a fortnightly group just to sort of see how they were going because we needed people to stick to the protocol. Only 45 people finished it. No surprise, people drop off. They're not following the protocol. And even then, some didn't do it completely accurately, but we still had pretty good results. And then we actually had 15 people, well, to be honest, it was 30, but only 15 finished. We had 30 people say, we don't want to stop the protocol. We feel fantastic. Me included. I reversed my biological age. I came out actually significantly older to start with, which was a bit disappointing, but I had already preempted the group. I was like, listen, I've had Graves' disease. I've burnt the candle at both ends. I've lost both my parents. I was coming off the back of caring for my dad, and I didn't feel my health was at my best, but I had really great results. And then we had a group of us stay on and do the 6 months. But that 6-month time point actually crossed over between 2023 and 2024 Christmas period. So out of those 30 people, only 15 actually ended up saying, I'm going to do the 3rd test because I've started drinking alcohol again, or I just totally dropped off, and this is what happens in real life. But it showed that in a really short period of time, you can make a phenomenal difference. And the reality is I wasn't even sure if we would see much of a difference in 3 months. The reason I did 3 months, and you probably know this from all the work that you do with your clients, Tarek, and with all of your trainers, is that I was fairly certain I could have a group of people stick to something for 3 months because I have longer programs. My autoimmune recovery program's 12 months, and I just see that people just drop off. Even if they're getting results, life happens. So I didn't do 3 months because I thought that's what you needed. I just thought that's the most likely time that I think people will really follow the protocol. And let's just see this biological age test. Is it, robust? Is it something that seems to give, fairly accurate results? And as practitioners, health coaches, can we put some interventions in and improve things? And we saw really good results. So there was markers of DNA damage through epigenetics that were probably our biggest result, most sort of almost phenomenal, if I can use that word. But in as little as 3 months, we saw what was considered an 8-year reduction in biological age when we're looking at a DNA damage marker. So there's a biological age clock published in Nature called DAM age, is to do with cellular damage. And our biological age as a group dropped by 8 years on that particular clock. A few of the others were less than that. We dropped our biological age by a couple of years. That's one thing to note. There are lots of different biological age clocks out there, but because we were looking at methylation across the DNA, we were able to compare that to lots of different biological age clocks. So I definitely want the listeners to know that, even small changes, we obviously had a comprehensive protocol and we were all in that together, but even small changes, just, a little bit of movement, changing your diet a little bit, all of these things are going to have a positive impact. And even if you're in a place of a chronic illness, like I had Graves' disease, which is definitely accelerated aging, we can turn that around if you start doing things. And it's normal to have times of accelerated aging and then slowing the aging process. It's never linear. So, even if you are listening to this and you're in a space and you think your health is not that great, you can always start making some changes to improve that.
Yeah, very promising and encouraging at once. Yeah, and when that trauma does come on, I told myself, and both my mum and dad passed away in 2023, I thought, 2024 is going to be an amazing year. But that was a struggle for me personally. It was so many ups and downs, and to sort of maintain balance, with everything that I'm doing and just being as well. So yeah, definitely a disruptor. And it allowed me to appreciate the process of grieving and also just to sort of care for the body a lot more. Because, I noticed that all of a sudden my anxiety was up, and, I was feeling like I was going to pass out. It was a terrible experience. For some people, it might be expressed a little differently. So yeah, sort of being a little bit kind to oneself, but sort of being aware of what's happening inside of oneself, your body, and, if there is a little bit of anxiety that's built up, what's it connected to, if it is a traumatic event, or it could be something more subtle. So I think in and amongst all of this is really an internal process, awareness, contemplation, that will allow you to identify how you're feeling to certain events. A good guide would do that, whether it's a coach or life coach or a personal trainer. So all of this stuff is so good, Denise. And so is the study published just yet?
It should be. That is on me. So very, very close. I said that it was going to be done by June, and that's only a few days away, but it will be published soon, and I'll definitely share that with you. So yeah, really looking forward to getting that out there. And as you said too, losing my parents, even though my mum had been sick for about 20 years, so she had early onset dementia, and I have the strongest genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's, which is sort of what's moved me personally into the healthy aging space as well. I'm an older mum, not for fertility issues, because I studied for 12 years and it was all just work and career and training and partying. And I just somehow woke up one day and went, oh my goodness, I'm getting older. And I was just having too much fun with life. And so my little one is only 8 and I'll be 47 soon. So I really want to be around for my kids. And, sadly, my mum, even though she was alive, I don't think she knew that she had grandkids. She was more in a vegetative state those last years. But there's a whole grieving process that takes a long time, when you lose a loved one, and it's hard to maintain your health, particularly the level of health that I'm sure, if you're listening to this or your trainers, we have a very high expectation. And as you said, I liked what you said before, be kind to yourself, allow yourself to just move through all that and take the pressure off yourself, because there will be a time and a new season where then you can really put that energy in to regain the health that you had. But just allow yourself to process those emotions and look for support, because life can definitely be a bit tough at times.
Very good wisdom here in and amongst the information and knowledge that people can do their own research about, and of course research your stuff further. If there are any links that we can add to the show notes that would be relevant, we'll have them, and how people could know more about you. Dr. Denise, is there any sort of medium, social media, etc., that people can find you and reach out?
Yeah, I'm on social media. I guess I have to say I'm probably not so prolific, but I am on social media. You can find me, connect with me if you want to reach out and you've got any questions. If you are a practitioner and want to learn more, then, reach out. Or even if you're a client or a patient, I have a free Facebook group. I'm not in there very much these days, but it's called Your Genes and Nutrition. And I used to pop in weekly and just answer questions. Maybe we'll get you in, Tarek, and you can talk about exercise. I've got a great group of a few thousand people, patients and practitioners from all around. But yeah, feel free to connect with me and reach out. I want to drop one thing. I am off to London, and guess what? I've got a formal invite to the House of Commons at the Palace of Westminster Palace, because the royal family and a lot of the policymakers are really sort of, I guess, open to complementary and integrative medicine. So I'll be over there speaking. But when we are talking about this movement of, proactive and preventative health and healthy aging, I really do think we're at a time globally where we are getting a lot more interest in just things like, exercise and nutrition, and how this really should be something that is not complementary, but should be as in, mainstream medicine. So, yeah.
It's definitely an exciting time. We're seeing this synergy of, the traditional, sort of starting to accept and open up that there isn't just one way, that, all over all of these years or centuries, we've had Chinese medicine, we've had breath work, we've had yoga, we've had all of these so-called complementary, which, let's take those tags away and just say it's all part of health. It's all part of aging and longevity, and all of those good things that we're chasing don't need to be chased anymore. It just becomes part and parcel of what a doctor will prescribe or what they would suggest according to the Hippocratic Oath. I think, go back to, so, and if medicine's required, of course, pharmacologically speaking, then okay, that's fine. But yes, you're right. We're at this exciting space now, and I hope those listeners are spurned on by this in their own journey. Obviously, this is only 40 to 50 minutes long, so hopefully it's just teased enough and sparked enough interest to explore more. And Dr. Denise is at the forefront of this, and we hope to have you back on at some point and also to have our eyes on your study. So looking forward to all of those good things.
And us working together in the future.
We will. There will most definitely be that. Thanks for your time, Denise. If you haven't already, we would be honored if you would consider subscribing and following us on your favorite platform. That way, you'll never miss an episode and you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. We truly appreciate your support and we can't wait to continue to grow and connect with you